Uh, oh, thank you. Hi. I'm exhausted today. Bum, 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 ba-da-dum, bum, bum, bum. Mm, mm, mm. What? How can I upload this? That is not this class. External tool. Why are you making so much racket? Why are you making so much racket? You're making so much racket. Oh, okay. AP. Where is this? Practice. No. Oh God, where is it? Here we go. Bum, bum, bum. Ba-do-do-do-do-do-do. Where is everybody? Oh. Where is everybody? David's here. Mario will be here. Okay, here comes everybody. Hi, everyone.
Hi. Say hi.
Oh, hello. Well, younger than what I'm used to teaching. Oh, what? Oh my God, yes, thank you. Okay, so all the staff has to read this book, and we do these book clubs, and it's horrible. Like, you guys hate group projects, we do too. And we're supposed to like do our group project next Monday, and it just got put off until December 7th. And I am so thrilled. That's great.
She just stood up and pointed at the screen and said, "Is that your friend?"
Who is this? Who is this baby?
She's my neighbor. I'm babysitting her because I need money.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. I'm thinking about what I need to prepare you guys for. The first thing is that I've been giving this spiel in all of my classes today, but first quarter was tough on everybody, and that was really the reason that I kind of relaxed my late work policy and allowed you guys to turn in things like much later than they were due. And I'm happy that I did it because it definitely, not just in this class, but in lots of classes, really improved people's grades. And I certainly didn't want anybody to start off with a failing grade for the year. But from here on out, I'm going to tighten back up on my late policy. And whenever I post something on Canvas, I'm going to automatically have it set so that it closes a week after it's due. So that way you'll know that you won't be able to submit it. Obviously, if there are extenuating circumstances, always come talk to me about it. Particularly if you're having like internet issues, you're unable to submit for some reason, that kind of thing is more a part of our lives than ever, unfortunately. In fact, our Wi-Fi here was out like last period, and I was literally like, I'm gonna have to email my whole AP class and just tell them to take a day off because I can't meet with them. But unfortunately that didn't happen. Maybe another time. We're actually working from home tomorrow because there's not going to be any internet in this building, so that'll be fun. That will actually be fun. I'll actually like sleep until time to teach. So today we are going to kind of work on some multiple choice, but differently than we have before. We're going to work on it together. And then tomorrow I'm going to give you guys a multiple choice thing to do on your own. It's not on AP Classroom. It's one that I have found from a different source that I use. But I want to go through it together. I want to go through one of them together today. It's one that does use like a pre-20th century text, which is not always fun, but you will definitely have a pre-20th century text on the AP exam at the end of the year. So we need to get more familiar with them. It's definitely a weakness of mine as a teacher that I don't give you more 20th century texts, but it's because I know that y'all don't like them and I don't really like them, but we got to do them. And the more you familiarize yourself with older texts, the easier they are to kind of digest, just because you're used to it. So, all right. I have, oh, wait a minute. I didn't finish doing attendance. Silly me. Okay, so I just posted this one on Canvas. It says AP Lang MC practice test number 4. It's a Google Doc, and I'm going to share my screen with you. I'll turn this on too. Maybe. Things been giving me a hard time today and every day, honestly. So this is not an assignment. It's not anything that you're having to turn in anything for. We're just going to kind of go through it together. I want to read the text first and then go through each of the questions and kind of talk about what they're looking for, see what you guys think the answers could be, and, don't freak out if you're getting some of them wrong. Tomorrow, the one that I'm going to give you, I am going to have you turn it in, but still I don't want you to worry too much because I just want to see how many you're getting right out of how many you try. You know, if you totally bomb it, it's not going to affect your grade. So, all right. So this thing that we're going to read was written in 1792. Mary Wollstonecraft, who was the mother of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, wrote this in the introduction to her book, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, which is one of the big like feminist texts that we kind of like look back on. So try your best to pay attention and make note of any words that you don't know, or even go ahead and look them up if you don't know them. Obviously, that's not something that you'd be able to do on a test, but while we have the resources at our disposal, let's use them. Okay. My own sex, I hope, will excuse me if I treat them like rational creatures instead of flattering their fascinating graces and viewing them as if they were in a state of perpetual childhood, unable to stand alone. I earnestly wish to point out in what true dignity and human happiness consists. I wish to persuade women to endeavor to acquire strength, both of mind and body, and to convince them that the soft phrases, susceptibility of heart, delicacy of sentiment, and refinement of taste are almost synonymous with epithets of weakness, and that those beings who are only the objects of pity and that kind of love, which has been termed its sister, will soon become objects of contempt. Dismissing then those pretty feminine phrases which the men condescendingly use to soften our slavish dependence, and despising that weak elegancy of mind, exquisite sensibility, and sweet docility of manners supposed to be the sexual characteristics of the weaker vessel, I wish to show that elegance is inferior to virtue, that the first object of laudable ambition is to obtain a character as a human being, regardless of the distinction of sex, and that secondary views should be brought to this simple touchstone. This is a rough sketch of my plan, and should I express my conviction with the energetic emotions that I feel whenever I think of the subject, the dictates of my experience and reflection will be felt by some of my readers. Animated by this important object, I shall disdain to cull my phrases or polish my style. I aim at being useful, and sincerity will render me unaffected. Ugh. Come on, man. Sorry, guys. David, do you have it up on your screen so that it's not super necessary for me to do this? Okay. Yeah, the thing that I'm reading. Let me see. Where was I? I don't know why it just cuts out sometimes. It's so dumb. Okay, I think I'm at line 29. I might be rereading a little bit, but not too much. Animated by this important object, I shall disdain to cull my phrases or polish my style. I aim at being useful, and sincerity will render me unaffected. For wishing rather to persuade by the force of my arguments than dazzle by the elegance of my language, I shall not waste my time in rounding periods, nor in fabricating the turgid bombast of artificial feelings, which, coming from the head, never reach the heart. I shall be employed about things, not words, and anxious to render my sex more respectable to members of society. I shall try to avoid that flowery diction which is slided from essays into novels and from novels into familiar letters and conversation. These pretty nothings, these caricatures of the real beauty of sensibility, dropping glibly from the tongue, vitiate the taste, I guess that's how you pronounce that word, and create a kind of sickly delicacy that turns away from simple, unadorned truth. And a deluge of false sentiments and overstretched feelings, stifling the natural emotions of the heart, render the domestic pleasures insipid, that ought to sweeten the exercise of those severe duties which educate a rational and immortal being for a nobler field of action. The education of women has of late been more attended to than formerly, yet they are still reckoned a frivolous sex, and ridiculed or pitied by the writers who endeavor by satire or instruction to improve them. It is acknowledged they spend many of the first years of their lives in acquiring a smattering of accomplishments. Meanwhile, strength of body and mind are sacrificed to libertine notions of beauty, to the desire of establishing themselves. The only way women can rise in the world, by marriage. And this desire making mere animals of them. When they marry, they act as such children. When they marry, they act as such children may be expected to act. They dress, they paint, and nickname God's creatures. Surely these weak beings are only fit for a seraglio. Can they govern a family or take care of the poor babes whom they bring into the world? The end of this part. My my inclination, or like what I automatically want to do is like sum this up for you. But I'm going to try to not do that because some of these questions might ask about like, what is this basically about? And I want to go through the questions individually. So I'll kind of flip back and forth or like scroll back up and down when we're looking at specific things. The first one asks, in the initial paragraph, the author employs both two of these things. So we'll go back and look at the first paragraph in just a minute, but your options are apology and classification, irony and classification, analogy and extended metaphor, flattery and epithets, and induction and persuasion. Are there any of those things that you don't know what they are? Sorry, I'm like trying to open the chat at the same time. Okay, so we pretty much know what these things are. The one that I would have maybe been like thought that maybe you guys wouldn't know would be induction, which is sort of hard to explain. But it's like a form of reasoning. So let's go back up to this first paragraph and kind of look and keep these options in mind. Look and see if she uses apology, if she uses classification, if she uses irony, if there's an analogy or an extended metaphor, if there's flattery or epithets or induction or persuasion, because she's using two of those. And you guys can also open them, you know, on your own screens, which might be easy because might be easier to do than have me continue scrolling up and down. Anyone have a guess as to what this answer might be? In this first paragraph, the author uses which two of these things? Okay, I'm gonna start making you guys guess on the next one. I'll call on somebody to type their guess in the chat. Don't be afraid of being wrong. It's totally okay. So this one, if you look back up, where is this? This first sentence shows some irony, some verbal irony. My own sex, I hope, will excuse me if I treat them like rational creatures, kind of ironically saying that women are typically not rational creatures or not like looked upon as being rational creatures. So knowing that there's irony in this first paragraph, in the very first sentence, you can kind of look back and say, well, like I saw irony. Do I see classification here? Yeah, I think so. Strength of mind and body, susceptibility of heart, delicacy, like that's all classifying. And classifying women as beings who are only the objects of pity or love, classifying them as not rational creatures. So that one is going to be B. We're still going to look at the first paragraph for number 2. Anybody know what the word decry means? I would not normally pull out my phone during class, but I want to be able to like look up words if we need to look them up. Anybody know what decry means? Not describe, or explains, but like in a negative way. To like publicly come out against something, to publicly denounce. So let's look back at the first paragraph again. The author denounces one of these things. She's like speaking out against it. Either traditional feminine attributes, traditional male attributes, modern sexuality, the importance of love, or the importance of sentiments. So looking back at this first paragraph, which of those things do you think that she is speaking against? Yes, AJ, it is a traditional feminine attributes. She's kind of like, and you can kind of tell that from that first sentence where she's using irony to say like women are not usually looked at as being very practical or logical or rational. So she's kind of like, she's sort of speaking out against the traditional idea that women are not those things, and like encouraging us to look at women as having all of these positive attributes. Okay. Still in this first paragraph for number 3, the author suggests that men prefer strong women. I'm going to go ahead, just like this is the way that I'm thinking through this. When I first read that, I don't think that that's the right answer, because most of the rest of the essay is kind of about how women are typically like looked on as the weaker sex, and like we need to be stronger, even though that's not what the world expects of us. So I don't think it's going to be the first one, because everything else is kind of saying the opposite. B, men will never love a strong woman. C, men never respect strong women. D, women need emotional and physical strength. Or E, women need intellectual and physical strength. What do we think? C, men never respect strong women. It could be that. I would say, okay, we've got C, D, or E, and I'm glad you said D or E, because I think we'd have to look at it pretty closely. Those are very similar answers, which kind of makes me inclined to think it's going to be one of those two, just because it's kind of it's almost like a trap. So we'd have to look kind of closely to see, are they saying that women need emotional strength, or are they saying that women need intellectual strength? So let's look back at it for a second. And what it says here actually is like pretty on the nose. I wish to persuade women to endeavor to acquire strength. That's exactly right, Victoria. She said strength in mind and body. So yeah, again, like just kind of look back through the text and see if there are any clues there, because that one was actually like pretty spot on. And I totally understand why AJ would say C, because I think if we take this text a little bit further, I think that could be implied. But since E is directly said, then that's going to be the correct answer. Okay, so Number 4 is asking us about the transition between the first and second paragraphs. They're tied to each other, but we transition from the first paragraph into the second paragraph by using a couple of these words. So let's just look back and see which of these words are used. Vessel and touchstone, soften and inferior, laudable and sex, slavish and virtue, or soften and weak. So I'm thinking there's going to be like one of those words in the first paragraph and one in the second. Let's see. Almost synonymous with epithets of weakness, and those beings who are only the objects of pity, and that kind of love which has been termed its sister will soon become objects of contempt. Dismissing then those pretty feminine phrases which the men condescendingly use to soften our slavish dependence, and despising that weak elegancy of mind, etc., etc., supposed to be the sexual characteristics of the weaker vessel. So I've noticed weak in both of those. Slavish and vessel were used in the second one. Someone have a guess? It's definitely very hard to like keep focus. I totally understand. I wish we were all in person for this because I think it's very hard for you guys to like keep looking at the answers and like have me scroll up and down. Yes, guys, it is E. Soften and weak. Very nice. Whoop, there we are. I was just looking back at it, and weak was there a couple of times. Soft phrases. Good. Okay. The word vessel in line 20 is a metaphor for one of these things: sex, woman, man, phrase, or character. So let's look back at line 20 and maybe read a little bit of what's around it. This is talking about women and like men condescending to women. We're supposed to, all these things are supposed to be the sexual characteristics of the weaker vessel. That one, I feel like when you talk about women being the weaker something, like a particular word comes to mind. Any guesses on this one? David said B. Aria said B. Okay, so with this one, while we are referring to women, the word vessel itself is not a metaphor for women, because like, let's just kind of try to plug it in actually. We're talking about all these things which are supposed to be the sexual characteristics of the weaker woman. And since we're talking about all these things being feminine, we're not really comparing to women, but we are comparing to something else. What, David? You say A? Yes. The weaker sex, which is like a phrase that gets used all the time anyway. Like people say that women are the weaker sex, or sometimes they say that they're not. But in this case, they're just using the word vessel instead. Okay, so this is kind of an overall question. We're like broadening out a little bit. There are 11 questions, by the way. I'm just like trying to keep an eye on the time too. What time is this over? We got time. We're good. The author suggests that a woman's worth may be best judged by comparing her with a praiseworthy man. Are you okay, Marilyn? AJ's already guessing C. Let me go through the options. Comparing her with a praiseworthy man, examining the elegance of her writing, which I automatically kind of think is not really about women's writing, so it's probably not that. Evaluating the strength of her character, evaluating her physical beauty. Again, I'm thinking not D, because this whole thing is about like looking beyond physical beauty, or examining her manners. So I kind of went ahead and like eliminated B and D. That's just like my thought process. If you want to argue for one of them, you certainly can. So between A, C, and E, AJ says C. Anyone else have a thought or agree? Okay, AJ is on the mark. It is C, evaluating the strength of her character. That's kind of what this whole thing is about how we should evaluate a woman's character rather than just her looks or like her accomplishments. Okay, the author proposes to write in a manner that is both cogent and emotional, polished and intellectual, ornate and rhetorical, elegant and cerebral, or convincing and flowery. Do we need to know what any of these words mean? Do we know all of them? The first one? Cogent means like logical, clear and logical. AJ says she knows half of these words. That's fair. Okay, so in the first one, cogent means clear, logical, and convincing. We know what emotional means. I think we know what polished and intellectual means. Ornate means like, it actually kind of means flowery, like complicated and pretty and like decorative. That's a good word for it. And rhetorical, like in this sense, if you're saying she's writing in a rhetorical way, that kind of doesn't make a ton of sense. Concerned with the art of rhetoric. Like, is she going out of her way to write really like convincingly, I guess. Elegant and cerebral. Cerebral means like using your, well, more than just using your brain. I prefer to look up definitions just because I'm not always good at defining things. Dictionary.com, you dummy. Of or relating to the brain or intellect. They do kind of all feel like they mean the same thing. Like, there's several words in here that mean convincing. There's a couple of words that mean like she uses elevated language. So you kind of have to like weed out which ones are saying similar things, or like look at the ones that are saying similar things and look at the words they're paired with and think like, do they fit that? So like, is she convincing? Because if she's convincing, then we could potentially eliminate it, or eliminate some of them. Like, D does not mean convincing. Honestly, like 4 of the 5 of them sort of mean like polished, ornate, elegant, flowery. I feel like those are all really similar. So my thought there, if I'm looking at those and saying like 4 of those have really similar words in it, I think it's much easier to look at the one that doesn't fit that, and rather than look at each individual one of these. So is it cogent and is it emotional? Is it convincing and does she use her emotions? And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you the answer is yes to that. So the answer to that one is A. I do feel like that's one that you kind of have to sort through and like eliminate answers, because it's not like it's pretty straightforward. It's not really like super flowery and like elevated. Okay, so we're gonna look at line 43 for number 8. We're gonna look at the words pretty nothings. And when it says they're a reprise, we kind of know what a reprise is just because of music. Most of us probably will. There are all these other things that she said previously to that, which I'll start looking at like line 34. Is it referring to the same thing as letters and conversation, essays and novels, flowery diction, rounding periods, or members of society? So let's look back at let's look like right here and then read through that part. I'm starting on line 34. I shall not waste my time in rounding periods, that's one of the options, nor in fabricating the turgid bombast of artificial feelings, which coming from the head never reach the heart. I shall be employed about things, not words, and anxious to render my sex more respectable to members of society. I shall try to avoid that flowery diction which has slided from essays into novels and from novels into familiar letters and conversation. And then she says, these pretty nothings. So when she says these pretty nothings, what is she referring to? And that's how we're going to find our answer. The letters and conversation, essays and novels, flowery diction, rounding periods, or members of society. One kind of thing I wanted to mention just to sort of guide you, I would be not inclined to think that something in line 43 is going to go back to something that we talked about in line 34. That seems like a long time to kind of keep something in mind. Victoria says C, and she is correct, flowery diction. So just if you want to look back at this for just a second, she says, I shall try to avoid that flowery diction, which has slided from essays and novels, blah, blah. These pretty nothings, these examples of flowery diction. I feel like that one is kind of, that's one where you really have to read closely. It's, this multiple choice stuff can be tough, just because it requires so much close reading and like referring back to other things, and it can be tough. But that's when we're practicing. It's not the most exciting stuff, and I totally understand that, but it is stuff that we have to do, and the more we practice with it, the better we'll get at it. Number 9, with the phrase dropping glibly from the tongue, the author begins one of these things. A caricature of women, so like an exaggeration of what women are like. A critique of turgid bombast. You guys totally know what turgid bombast means, right? Let's look up both of those words, because those are not the only words that we'll have to look up for these answers. Turgid means pompous. In fact, it says pompous or bombastic. So bombast is going to be like somebody who is bombastic. High sounding language with little meaning used to impress people. So when you're like using big words to say nothing. A panegyric of sugary writing. I'm sure you guys know what a panegyric is. It's basically like a text or a speech that praises someone or something. An analysis of sentimental writing. I think we know all those words. Or an extended metaphor. So back at your options for just a second. Try to like think about what you're going to be looking for. And then we're going to go back to line 44. They're talking about these pretty nothings, these caricatures of the real beauty of sensibility, dropping glibly from the tongue. Vitiate the taste and create a kind of sickly delicacy that turns away from simple, unadorned truth and a deluge of false sentiments and overstressed feelings, blah, blah, blah. So it's referring to the pretty nothings, but what, which of these things does it actually begin? Are they beginning a caricature of women, a critique of people saying a lot without actually saying very much at all, praising very sugary writing, analyzing sentimental writing, or are they creating an extended metaphor there? Any guesses? Okay, I'll give you this one. Because it actually kind of stuck out to me when I was reading it this second time. When it said dropping glibly from the tongue, it makes it sound like the words are like tangible and real, like the way they drop from your tongue. And then it mentions like the taste, and it creates a kind of sickly delicacy. It almost sounds to me like they are describing words like it's really sweet, gross candy. And because they kind of continue that, they even mention like sweetening the exercise of these severe duties. It kind of, it makes me think that that's an extended metaphor. I feel like it's kind of hard to directly say what they're comparing it to, but they are kind of like conjuring up this image that lasts through the whole paragraph. So that one kind of became clear to me just because it put a picture in my head. But if it didn't do that for you, no big deal. Another thing that you could do is go through and eliminate answers. I feel like there's usually one answer, like in a multiple choice thing like this, there's usually one answer that's sort of like your distractor answer that when you see it, you're like, oh, it's probably that. And I feel like A is the distractor answer in this one because it says a caricature of women and the word caricature is like right there in that line. So I feel like they're kind of trying to throw you off. And that's so mean because this stuff is hard enough as it is without someone trying to trip you up. But I feel like they are a little bit with that one. And stuff like that often happens. Okay. One can infer from the passage, so this is sort of a big picture question, that to become strong human beings rather than mere children, young women need an education different from that of young men, more understanding husbands, obliging husbands, a good marriage, or the same education as that of young men. So when I read through those answers, the first one that sticks out as like probably wrong to me is C, obliging husbands, just because this whole thing is like, oh, not, sorry, I'm wrong. It's D, a good marriage, just because like the whole thing is a pretty feminist piece of writing. And if it was trying to say that we needed marriage in order to like become real people, I feel like that's kind of contradictory. Victoria guessed E, and she was right. The same education as that of young men. This whole thing is called the vindication of the rights of women. And so like they're fighting for women to have more rights. It would probably be kind of counterintuitive.
It's 2:00.
Thank you. To think that it would be A, like that we would need a different education because equality doesn't usually mean different. Okay, and the tone of the final paragraph is sardonic, condescending, ironic, sarcastic, or haughty. So, are there any of these words that we need to know? Maybe the first one, which means grimly mocking or cynical. That's what sardonic means. Condescending, like looking down on someone. Ironic, using irony. Sarcastic, we're all familiar with. And haughty means like, that's sort of the same thing as condescending, actually. Like you're above your station, like kind of snobby. So let's look back at the final paragraph. We're almost done, guys. Okay, I'm just going to read this whole paragraph again, although I actually wanted to look up one of these last words, seraglio. Oh, it's the sequestered living quarters used by wives and concubines in an Ottoman household. Interesting, like secluding women. Okay. The education of women has of late been more attended to than formerly, yet they're still reckoned a frivolous sex and ridiculed or pitied by the writers who endeavor by satire or instruction to improve them. It's acknowledged that they spend many of the first years of their lives in acquiring a smattering of accomplishments. Meanwhile, strength of body and mind are sacrificed to libertine notions of beauty, to the desire of establishing themselves. The only way women can rise in the world, by marriage. And this desire making mere animals of them. When they marry, they act as such children may be expected to act. They dress, they paint, and nickname God's creatures. Surely these weak beings are only fit for a seraglio. Can they govern a family or take care of the poor babes whom they bring into the world? Okay, looking back at our options, does anyone have a guess? The tone of the final paragraph. I've kind of got it narrowed down to a couple in my head, or at least to 3. AJ's guessing E. So I feel like condescending and haughty are very similar, first of all. And while this is definitely, I feel like she's more trying to say that other people are looking down on them rather than her looking down on someone else. So B and E were actually the ones that I kind of eliminated in my own head. But I did notice, so one of the reasons that I eliminated those two were just because between sardonic, ironic, and sarcastic, those all are going to like contain some bit of irony. And when I looked back at the passage, there were a few statements that kind of stuck out in my head, like the desire of establishing themselves, the only way women can rise in the world, by marriage. And we know that that's not how she really feels. Surely these weak beings are only fit for a seraglio. Like she's just spent the whole time saying that women are not weak. So she's definitely using irony. Is her tone just ironic, or is it more than that? Sarcastic, I feel like she is using sarcasm. I almost feel like irony, sarcasm, and sardonicism, I don't know, or like a hierarchy. Like you can use irony without being sarcastic. She's definitely being sarcastic, so we can kind of like amp that up to the next level. Sardonic means like cynical. Does she raise it to that point? Does this sound cynical? Does it sound harsh? And that's kind of how we can determine which one of these it is. I would be inclined to say D over C, but in this case, it's actually A, that kind of like upper tier of sarcasm. It's not just like sarcasm to make a point or like to be kind of funny. It takes it to that next level. It's really cynical. It's kind of harsh. It's kind of mocking the system. Um, so that one is actually A. So I know that this is pretty tough and it's not like the most fun thing to do. But like I said, the more you do this kind of thing, the more you read like pretty pre 20th century texts, the easier it's going to be to digest. And while we do have resources at our disposal, like looking words up, we should absolutely do it. So what I'm going to have you guys do tomorrow is actually another multiple choice thing, very similar to this. It's not on what's it called? AP Classroom. I'm just going to post it on Canvas, and you guys are going to do it independently. And spend as much time as you need to with it. Like I said, it's not going to be for a grade. I just want to get a sense of where you guys are with how many you are getting right. And then, if I see some that like everybody's getting wrong, maybe it's that type of question, and we can kind of work on those skills and like hone in on some areas of struggle. So that's what we're going to do tomorrow. And I'm actually trying to remember if this one is like maybe a little harder. The one that y'all are doing tomorrow is not a pre-20th century text. It's 20th century. It's like 1970s, I think. So it'll be a little bit easier to digest without having somebody guide you through it. So that should be a little bit of a relief, hopefully. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. I'll kind of walk you through what it looks like and what you should be doing. So any questions before I let you guys go? We only have 2 minutes till the bell, so that was really like perfect timing. Okie doke. Well, I will see you guys tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for your attention.